Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this somewhat nice day. We're glad to have you here. Today's talk will be about blockchain. It'll be a big picture look at what blockchain is all about. You'll have the opportunity to ask some questions in the chat. But first, we'd like to take a brief minute or two to talk about some housekeeping. If you have any questions, you can use the chat session to pose any questions to the moderator or to the participants. You can use the captions and transcript button to access live captioning as well. This is the second installment of our Talking Business speaker series. In the last event, which was held last March, we had a timely conversation on the subject of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our featured speakers were Helen, Shelton, and Chris Collins. And just to give you an idea of the caliber of the participants that we have on these speaker series, Helen Shelton was a senior partner and chief diversity officer at Finn Partners, a global public relations firm working with brands such as Jack Daniels and Skillnet. She has experience running campaigns for iconic figures in art, music, fashion, and entertainment. And Helen shared her career journey and spoke about going beyond the traditional type of work to work on behalf of important causes. And the other speaker that day was Chris Collins. He's the founder and CEO of the World of Chris Collins, a luxury fragrance brand. He's a scent storyteller, and Chris talked about how his personal history and previous career at Ralph Lauren combined to set the stage for him to develop his own brand. That was a look at our past talk that we had in March, again, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today's talk is about blockchain. And for today, we're going to be discussing overall business applications of blockchain, its implications, any entrepreneurial innovations that are in the works with blockchain, and all the while considering its limitations. Today, we are joined by Ed Knox and Ara Ohanian. And Ed is he is the associate professor and academic director for the online business programs here at SPS. Dr. Knox's experience covers 25 years as an accomplished educator, administrator, business practitioner, and entrepreneur. As an educator, he has taught courses both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And for 14 years, he taught business courses at Medgar's College in CUNY, where he facilitated courses in marketing and entrepreneurship. He also has taught similar courses at SUNY New Paltz, as well as the same courses on a graduate level at New York Institute of Technology and Long Island University. Dr. Knox, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Carlos. One of the things I want to say about this particular series, it was actually designed for us to sort of delve into trending topics in business, and particularly those things we hear, conversations we hear that won't go away, and they have staying power. So as we look at these new concepts, it's very important. And today's discussion is about blockchain. We started hearing about it some time ago. It didn't seem to pick up much traction. And then all of a sudden, we kept hearing it over and over and over. And whatever we think about trends, the more we hear about them, there's a good chance they're sticking and staying. And we need to be sure that we are in those conversations, our students are in those conversations, and our graduates have the ability to leave our institution and go out and be able to engage in these particular issues as they lead these organizations. Ara Ohanian and I are in a partnership that I find the appropriate type of partnership between academic and practitioner. We connected some years ago through his work at New York Institute of Technology in the entrepreneurship space. my work in the academic space inside the classroom. And what we come to understand is that balance between our students understanding the academic, theoretical, conceptual space, but also understanding that they eventually are going to end up in the practical space. And so having that relationship is important in how we think, because we exchange ideas about what is expected and then what we are doing and how they align. So I'm really pleased to introduce Ara Ohanian. Ara is a seasoned tech entrepreneur and CEO who has founded and grown multiple software businesses in the global category leaders. His first startup was acquired by Deloitte. His second venture, a pioneer in e-learning, was acquired by Infor, a $4.5 billion multinational. Subsequently, Ara led Infor's $350 million global statutory compliance business as general manager and senior vice president. Thereafter, Ara partnered with private equity firms to scale founder-led tech businesses into their next phase of growth and value creation. This led to his appointment as CEO of Systech International, a supply chain security leader of pharmaceuticals. He sold to Dover Corp, a $10 billion publicly traded industrial conglomerate. After Systech, Ara found a focus on spinning off General Electric's intra-company building management business, which is about to merge with a leading financial tech leader, which he can't disclose. Ara is the recipient of the U.S. patent 6347943 for a system and method of creating individualized courses of instruction for e-learners. We're in good company because he's a CUNY man, having graduated at Baruch College. And with that, let's talk business. Carlos, back to you.
I would like to start off by talking about my own experience with blockchain, and that is limited. I've always thought, I've heard words bandied about such as blockchain or crypto, terminology that I thought was the same thing. I thought crypto and blockchain was the same thing, but I've come to learn that they're different. And I'm sure Ara will get into that kind of distinction. But I first would like to just start the conversation by asking you more on a personal level. Can you tell us about your business experience with blockchain and why you felt compelled to learn more about blockchain as a business person, as an investor?
Absolutely. First, I want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for being there. I always get very excited to speak to anyone from CUNY, because if it wasn't for CUNY, I would have missed a lot of opportunities in my life. And Baruch and CUNY were really behind a lot of the learning and the opportunities that derived. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Knox for inviting me and for having worked with me in multiple training and educational program over 3 universities. And he also fails to sometimes say he's more than an academic. He also came as an executive from General Electric. So he already bridges those 2 worlds. And occasionally he pulls somebody like me to just shed a little bit of light on one item that he feels that would be interesting to all. And also, Carlos, thank you for doing this. We've discussed a lot and how we can share some of the things we're learning, so I appreciate it. And behind the scene also, Trevon, Ryan, Heather, thank you for having made sure that our audio works and everything. So it's great to be here. I need to really start first with a little bit of a confession. I'm not a blockchain expert. I am not a technologist. I started as an entrepreneur. I then became an executive, and then I went back into entrepreneurship. And then as I got a little bit older, rather than start businesses from scratch, I partnered with private equity firms to take businesses that had been created by founders, brought from anywhere from 20, 30 to $75 million, but then they would plateau. And how do you take them to the next level of growth so they could be an exit? So my entire background has always been on the business side. And but because I've always been also business for technology, it's always been software platforms for business. Occasionally you come across something you really need to, you can no longer ignore. So with that, I'll answer your question, Carlos. The first time I was exposed to blockchain was about 4 years ago. I was hired as a CEO of Systech International, just almost $100 million business that did only one thing. They secured pharmaceutical drugs across the supply chain. And they did that for the top 20 companies in the world. They did two things. They both serialize it with alphanumeric, unique alphanumeric numbers, and then put an anti-counterfeiting digital signature on it, so that now you could trace those goods as they traveled the global supply. And that I came into a meeting, and there were some very smart technologists in the room. They said, "Hey, welcome to the company. Now that you're CEO, we have a project we need you to sign off on." And that project was with Merck. Merck was just about to release a cancer drug called Keytruda. It was a very big project for them, but that cancer drug had two challenges as they were going to get it into the market globally. One, it needed to always stay at a certain temperature to be effective. And two, in some parts of the market where they were going to release that particular drug, for instance, in Africa and some parts of Southeast Asia, there was so much piracy and counterfeiting of drugs that they were very concerned that their supply chain could be infiltrated with fake products. People will hear about, well, Keytruda and want to make money. So what happened, they decided that blockchain would be the way to address those two challenges. And what we ended up doing, we took the packaging of this pharmaceutical drug, this prescription drug, and the digital identity of that packaging, both in terms of its alphanumeric unique recognizer and the anti-counterfeiting signature, we turned that into a digital identity. We put it inside of a blockchain. So it became, now this physical product had its equal digital version sitting on a blockchain. The second thing we did, because we needed to keep that at a certain temperature, we added this little 5-cent sensor to all the packaging. And that sensor was designed so that if the temperature goes above or under a certain level, it would alert our software. And that sensor, again, send its information through the blockchain. So now we had a blockchain that was going to help us deliver a product, protect the product, and also make sure that it's always at the right temperature. So that was my introduction. I said, wow, this is really cool. And the reason it was so cool was that previously, pharmaceutical companies had tried to do that, but instead of that being done at a few cents a package, they were at best at a few dollars a package. And we're talking the difference between being able to secure a product for 5 cents versus securing it maybe for $20. Now, if you're selling a $500 product, maybe the $20 fine, but as you go into larger environments with the lower price products, you got to be at the 5 cents. So that there was an economic reason. This is how I got into it. So what happened, Carlos, I got this aha moment. I said, wow, if we can take blockchain and we can secure a pharmaceutical drug at lower cost and giving it transparency so we can see at any point where it is in the world and protect it from counterfeits, well, we could probably use blockchain for a lot more things. So I decided to enroll at MIT in their blockchain program. And then after that, I decided to learn about blockchain, but not blockchain from a technology perspective as much. I'm not a technologist. From perspective, what could it do for business?
All right. Thank you.
So that's how I got into it. And one thing, I will disappear for 1 second to get my glass of water that I filled but forgot to bring it next to me.
Yeah. As we wait, please remember to, if you have any questions, to drop it in the chat. We're going to have a very robust discussion here today. So Ara, thank you for talking to us about that application that the application of blockchain to the Merck company. If we can get into the meat of blockchain. So what is blockchain? What type of technology is it? And why is it important to know about? Can you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. I think, in order for me to understand the first time that I also had about what blockchain is. My chief technology officer of the company said, look, you've worked with databases all your life, right? You've been in companies, and whether it's financial information, whether it's a name of a person, their social security number, their whatever, we've worked with databases. And databases, basically, each company we work with has a database with our information. So you have our information in multiple places, multiple databases controlled by multiple intermediaries. So there's a lot of companies that have your info, my info, our info, when we do banking, when we're paying our bills, when we're validating whether we went to a school or not, and
even just shopping on Amazon, everybody
even
has
shopping on exactly.
And I just and there's a lot of talk about privacy, and when we talk about this kind of thing, and I like to remind people that this kind of privacy issue has been around ever since the first credit card was issued back in the 1950s, I believe, where they had your information already. Now it's just accelerated because of the technology.
Absolutely, Carlos. And so from here, so the blockchain basically graduates from our traditional database model that we had to create a distributed ledger that basically enables and records transactions. And these transactions are listed publicly. So now you can have your information or that transaction, instead of being in multiple databases, it's only in one place, and it can distribute itself, and it's transparent. So there are all kinds of efficiencies come with that, rather than having multiple places. And one other thing, there are no intermediaries. It becomes peer-to-peer. So if Carlos and I want to do a transaction, we don't have to go via Citibank and Citibank's agent and then the clearer. And all these people and these companies add cost and slow things down. We can go directly through that ledger with each other. Interesting.
So you mentioned that it takes out the middleman basically and reduces costs. Obviously, are there any other costs that blockchain can reduce?
Absolutely. And maybe before going to that, in terms of it's kind of, if you were taking notes, there are five principles about blockchain that I immediately jotted down when they were taught to me. The first thing about blockchain, it's distributed, right? So it goes everywhere, whereas a database could be in one place only. The second thing, it's peer-to-peer. It takes that middleman out. The third principle, it's transparent. And in fact, once you have, everybody that participates in it can see it. And then it is irreversible. And I think that's one thing before we go into cost. Why? If three of us each own a database that has Dr. Knox's social security number and his bank account. Sorry, Dr. Knox. And so Carlos has it, I have it, and Trevon has it. Now, every time we want to use it or attach an attribute to it, we have to input new data in our databases, and then we have to make sure they're synced. But there's one thing, we have power over our databases, therefore it's not irreversible. I can go in there, and if I'm a bad person, I could change something. If somebody has a reason for changing or makes a mistake, they can go back in. In a blockchain, it's irreversible. It goes in one place, it sits on that block, it's distributed, and we can not go back in it. So once it's created, that's it. So that's an important. As a result, things like identity, rights, credentials, or driver's license, or degrees, or where it came from, the authenticity, all these different things become sacred on a blockchain, because we know we can trust them because it's irreversible. And then from there, as we go into the cost, before thinking of cost, what type of technology is blockchain? I think that's an important thing to think for those of us, especially looking at it for business, whether we want to create one for our business, use one, invest in one, or think how could a competitor take us out of business because they have one. I think this is where it's a general purpose technology. And Carlos, if you think back, there hasn't been that many general purpose technologies, right? There was a steam engine, there was the dynamo, there was the internet, and now, so blockchain fits in that area. And
it's that important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, in terms of cost, it does reduce cost in a number of ways. And that's also one of the reasons why in finance, you see it used a lot, but one of the ways it reduces cost is in validating the information. Because the information is always in one place, the validation of that information happens in one place. So it's fast. The other thing is, the number one reason why things cost more, whether you're sending money, buying something, ordering something, is that the supply chain, whether it's a financial supply chain, a physical one that takes from Amazon what you've sent and so on, all of those things that happen, there's lots of middlemen. We call them intermediaries. Middlemen, middlewomen who actually want to make a buck in between. They say, hey, we'll take that information, we'll pass it from here to here, and we'll validate that the information was correct. And then once it gets to Carlos, Carlos does the same thing. As he passes it to Trevon, he validates it. So we become trusted intermediaries and we validate. And for that we charge, we make a living. So by taking that out, that function out, you now an algorithm, a computational program is the one that validates, and you take that cost out. So those are two of the main cost areas.
But just to highlight one bit, we use the word intermediaries, and when the internet first came on the scene in the 90s, the big buzzword was disintermediation, where the internet was basically allowing manufacturers to bypass retailers and other supply chain to talk directly to the consumer. I'm hearing that blockchain has a similar effect in terms of disintermediation.
Absolutely. And, if you think about it, when the internet came, this disintermediation was more about a physical product, right? So I buy a shirt, it's the movement of that shirt. Now, instead of going through different warehouses and so on, I take it from one place, I send it to you. As what's happening with blockchain, think of that same thing, but now we're in the digital world. So we hear about metaverse. I see some family members that are under me that are 8 hours in Fortnite. To them, it's as real. Well, we're in the digital world. So in that digital world, the intermediary goes away, becomes peer-to-peer. So now that's the biggest difference. And one other thing I wanted to mention for that you asked the question in terms of cost reduction. There's when you're transacting, there's always a cost of settling the transaction and reconciling that transaction. That means that we got to make sure that we settled the fact that there was money inside of Edwin Knox's account. And once it gets to Carlos, we also have to reconcile that money that left that account is a negative there. Now it became a positive here. So those are things that and that's these intermediaries typically do and they charge for. That gets automated. So that cost goes drastically down. And finally, one of the things whenever you have buying, selling, financial transactions, and especially if you're in regulated industry, but also in non-regulated, you all have audits that you have to do. So go back, say, who did we pay? Did we pay the right person? Did they receive it? Was the ledger, was the account correct? Is there anything that didn't make sense? So that's the audit. And companies spend millions and millions of dollars in auditing things. And that's why the Ernst & Youngs and so on are there. So that process, the audit process becomes automated because it's already part of the chain, which also makes it possible now to do compliance without this huge cost. So that gets automated and the costs go down. And that's why it's general purpose, because it doesn't impact any industry.
Right. I want to take a moment. There's some questions being asked in the chat. One of them, it talks about, you mentioned the irreversibility of blockchain. What if there's an error? How does one fix errors in the blockchain?
Absolutely. Well, it's a terrific question because it's a real issue. I'll jump to something we're going to talk about before called the last mile problem.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody's heard about that.
Okay.
So is that okay, Carlos? Because
Sure. Yeah.
it leads to it.
Yeah.
You've heard of the term junk in, junk out? Well, this is the thing. The blockchain's error really happens at the front end when it enters. In other words, I have this glass and this glass is in my hand and it's a physical object. If we want to put the identity of that glass into the blockchain, we create now a digital representation of it. Mm-hmm. It could be an NFT. We can talk later about that. It could be just an alphanumeric number, right, or digital signature, whatever. However, if in the first place, I had a fake glass, there's an error going into the system. So right, this is really, as you said, so okay, the error happens on the front end mostly.
Okay. Well, you made a perfect segue because my next question was going to be about NFTs. And that question is, what are NFTs and how do they play a part in all of this?
It's interesting. I had a hard time really grasping the NFT for a long time. And the thing that really made it clear for me is that the difference between an NFT and any other blockchain activity, such as the example of the pharmaceutical drug or this glass, is that the NFT exists to begin with as a native digital identity, right? So in other words, if there's a drawing of the cactus behind me as an entity, as it's created, drawn or recreated, the NFT is created, and it's a unique and it's non-fungible, meaning that it's the opposite of fiat currency. We could each on this call have a dollar bill and we could exchange to each other, give each other a dollar bill. We each have a dollar bill.
Right.
But if each of us had an NFT of a cactus, each NFT would be a different NFT and wouldn't be interchangeable with the other.
And we're throwing around a lot of terminology just for our audience. NFT stands for non-fungible token, I believe. That's correct. Yeah. Okay.
So and since you talk about NFT, it's interesting. Somebody asked me, said, "Well, how could there ever be value in that? That cactus you just said you created it. Why is it worth anything?" Now, it's true. I'm not. If Michael Jordan takes one of his shoes and he turns it into an NFT, he signs it, puts it out there, of course the collector value goes up, but there's also more mundane things that can be an NFT. Think about, for any of us who've done video games and now are going in products like Fortnite and we're traveling. Imagine if you see this beautiful villa and part of the game is to go in it and traverse it. Right. And let's say I've created a digital villa that has 6 rooms, or maybe I've recreated Frank Lloyd Wright villa as an NFT.
Right.
I could theoretically go to this company that makes these games and say, "Hey, look, why don't you buy my villa, put it in your game?" Now that becomes valuable. So there's very tangible ways in which you can create a product in the digital world and sell it.
Okay. What about finance in terms of, we have a lot of students, obviously, that are studying finance. Is blockchain ideal for finance?
It's ideal. It's the first natural place to be, right? Because when you're in finance, your world is digital, right? To begin with, it's about numbers and it's about transacting numbers. It's about deducting numbers. It's about applying attributes around that number. So all of these things in finance today have a lot of intermediaries, a lot of different databases that have it. So when a company says, "Oh, we're going to go into DeFi," they may say, "We take a process we had that had 10 intermediaries, 10 databases, and now we put it in a single distributed ledger." So the reason it also makes sense is that, and why finance went for it, one of the biggest issues in finance is double counting. And that's why you have so many reconciliations and audit. two people in two parts of the company put something and counted twice the same revenue for it.
Right.
Imagine the bigger you are, the more this can happen. If you do that via a blockchain, you've taken zero risk of that. So there's certain things about finance that made a natural place to start getting into blockchain, and that's why we see it first. But obviously, that's just the first step. There's so much more, and so many more industries.
So sticking with the transaction, to talk about the transactions, is there the issue of scalability? How does blockchain transact and validate transactions?
So Carlos, everyone, the one thing about blockchain was not built to begin with to be scalable, right? Just like, think about it, the internet was not built to be high bandwidth and fast. The internet democratized how we could access data.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you didn't have these intermediaries that own the data. Only investment bank have this information, right? The intelligence. And
sorry to interrupt. So that's the framework we're dealing with blockchain, is that it democratizes transactions?
Transactions, anything that becomes peer-to-peer, taking the middle person out, right? So from that, so it was meant to create transparency, being able to allow peer-to-peer and take the middleman or the middle intermediary out. Now,
so sorry to interrupt. So what we're dealing with in terms of blockchain, just for our audience and actually for my own edification also, blockchain is more of a framework, right? A platform.
It's a platform, yeah, absolutely. It's think of it, every time a blockchain goes up, you can say it's a network that does something that you can put your service or your product on it. But then also it's, as it is today, because it's a general purpose technology, it's early, just like those of us who remember the internet at 14.4, remember? That sound waited and the image loaded so slowly. It's a little bit, that's where it is today. So for instance, I'll give you an example. In the credit card industry, the average Visa card capability of transaction is 1,700 per second. Visa claims that their systems can go up to 24,000 transactions per second. Mm-hmm. So that's what, so that now you say, well, what if could blockchain take the middleman and do this? Well, today, no. Why? Because the average blockchain, Bitcoin, can transact 4 to 7 transactions per second. So you got 1,700 to 20,000 versus 4 to 7. Right. So it's not scalable. However, we're seeing changes. XRP, for instance, that's been built on Ethereum as a blockchain for transaction finance, is already at 1,500 per second. So that's only 3 years later. So its transaction speed is slow. So today it cannot do a lot of things you need it to do, but it will at some point. It's evolving. The other thing is a little technical. Any interest in just maybe touching on a few technical items that slow down blockchain, make it heavy and not scalable today?
Please do, yes.
And the evolution. So think of that. The way a blockchain validates a transaction, basically what happens is that the system throws out a cryptographic puzzle, challenge, product, riddle. Right. And then it needs to be solved. And when it's solved, by solving it, it validates that transaction or that transfer money went from here to there. It creates a block. The earlier block doesn't disappear, and this is the whole point. That's why it's irreversible. They're always tied to each other. But in creating that block, you need a lot of computational power today. For instance, in the Bitcoin blockchain, you need machines and machines and machines to solve those. Plus the model, which is called proof of work, that's the way the block gets created on blockchain. You have all these miners, both people who own machines and these machines, they go compete for solving that particular algorithm. And the first one to solve it creates the block, and this is done. That uses amazing amount of energy, therefore not eco-friendly.
Right.
But why is Ethereum seeing more and more adoption? Ethereum's taken the proof of stake of Bitcoin blockchain and says, no, we're going to evolve that. They create the proof of, instead of proof of work, proof of stake. Now, in a proof of stake now, instead of having now everybody and all the machine competing to solve that cryptographic puzzle, there's a lottery that says, okay, those who are in the lottery and win the lottery can solve it. So now instead of having millions of machines trying to solve that one thing, maybe you have a few hundred. So you did drop the amount of energy that's being used. And now this is changing, evolving with the new launch of the latest versions of Ethereum. They've called DPoS, distributed proof of stake. What they're doing there, instead, they go beyond the lottery. They said, okay, we will let those miners who are willing to put in escrow some of their tokens or money to put them at stake like a collateral, and then they go and solve it. Therefore, we know one thing, they will finish the job they started, because if they didn't or didn't do it well, they'll lose their money. So by that, they further narrowed the number of miners that participate in a particular transaction settlement. So now you're using even less energy and it happens quicker. So there's an evolution, but those are, think of it from proof of work to proof of stake to distributed proof of stake. That's where we're going for it.
Okay. Let's take a minute. We have another question from our audience. Basilos asks, blockchain promises to make many areas of the financial sector obsolete. What advice would you give to a business major on how to best position themselves for this changing landscape?
It's a great question. And I think, there's one has to look at it from two perspectives. One could be as an entrepreneur.
Right.
And the other one would be as somebody who's already in the business and offering something. So as an entrepreneur, you're looking at it and you say, how can I transform, disrupt an area, right? Yeah. So as an entrepreneur, when you're thinking in the future and you're a student today learning, you say, where can I go apply the blockchain and altogether pull the rug from under someone else? In other words, do to radio what TV did to radio.
Right.
So that's one, and we can talk about some examples later on. The second one is like, no, you're not an entrepreneur trying to take another business out or an industry out and doing it. You're already in business, and you say, how should I be using it? And in that case, it's different, because the adoption of blockchain does two things. Then you can adopt it in order to bring efficiencies, but at the same time, possibly protect yourself from another blockchain entrepreneur to come and altogether take you out. So depending on where you are, those are the two things I would think of.
Okay. So we hear about, you mentioned Ethereum before, and we've heard terms about where you were discussing before about the impact of this technology and that it's being called Web 3.0. Why should we be paying attention to this sort of thing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
The reason the term Web 3.0 has come, if you think about it, the blockchain is really the continuation of the internet, right? So the internet came and allowed peer-to-peer on information. It didn't solve the peer-to-peer issue on finance, on transaction, but it did that. And then it got faster at it. Blockchains at the beginning of where the internet was as the next layer on top, that now not only it's about information, it's about transaction and satisfying transaction and contracts. And this is where, for instance, we talked about proof of stake graduated to proof of work to proof of stake to distributed. There's another thing Ethereum's done that actually why it makes it that 3.0 usable kind of environment. That's a general technology. It's brought the concept of smart contracts into it, and that really changes things drastically. So think about it. If we're transacting, let's say you love cars and I love cars. Yes. And today, without the blockchain, if we were going to buy a car online, we'd go to eBay and or an auctioneer, right. and we transact through them. And the reason they are helpful is because they validate the fact that Ara really has the car and Carlos really has the money. And as this is happening, they make sure that I don't just take the car and don't give the money, right?
Okay.
So those are trusted intermediaries. With smart contracts, they basically turn that into a code. And now with your code on the blockchain, you can attach a smart contract that says that since Ara and Carlos want to buy and sell a car with each other, and they want to do it peer-to-peer, the smart contract replaces the middle intermediary, and that contract would say only release the money that exists in the account, in Ara's account, Carlos' account, when the bill of lading that shows that the car went and is going towards Carlos has happened, for instance. So this would be an example.
So we're seeing, many more startups selling cars, used cars or even new cars. From what I'm gathering, and that's based, those are traditional transactions just on the internet, basically, right? Instead of going to the dealership in person, you're buying either a used car or a new car through the internet. But from what I'm hearing from you is that, again, these middlemen will be put aside, disintermediated, and it'll be a buyer-seller direct relationship.
That's basically the promise of that. By taking the internet from where it is to is still full of middlemen for transactions and services, blockchain promises to take it to 3.0, which now you're scaling that capability. So think of a few other things. Let's say insurance. Today, when we buy insurance, I go to my agent, the agents go to the broker has a central national underwriter, and the underwriter works with the investors who put money inside of an insurance company. There's so many players. But think about, what if someone starts an insurance company that's just blockchain based, that's peer-to-peer? There's enough money put for from my business to your business that that if something happens, what would happen to the premiums? All of those the premium's going to go down. So this democratizing of the transactional components that happen on a blockchain by having the ability to, in a mega way, change the economic structure, become a 3.0 technology.
Now, obviously, it'll democratize, but in certain industries, I assume you mentioned insurance. Insurance is a tricky category. I'm assuming because it's very personal, very important. So there's going to have to be years and years of brand loyalty developed to be able to trust the brand, right?
Absolutely, and that's the intermediaries in some places they're not going to disappear everywhere. But I think generally speaking, there's so many things we do we don't realize have so many different points before they go from me to you. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot more efficiencies that will accelerate transactions and will also reduce the cost of them.
So from what I'm hearing then is that credit cards will be a thing of the past.
Theoretically, yes. I mean, think about it. Even Venmo could be a thing of the past.
Which just started yesterday,
We just started. So the opportunity, and again, we're at the beginning. So the creative elements of how keep on happening every day. For instance, there's a company called Helium. I don't know if anybody's heard of them. Helium, this were a few young people, probably like a lot of people in this group, not with huge experiences. They looked and they say, it's interesting, the world of data and IoT devices is owned by the large communication companies, Verizon, Bertelsmann, and all these. They own all of the cell towers and the mobile towers and so on. So they are the ones who make deal with those RFID device provider, and they say, okay, if you put that, we'll transfer the data, and then they charge a lot. But also because it's not a blockchain, everywhere that they do this, from different center, different region, and so on, the data is different. So now you need in the middle data management company who can take this data, help you make dashboards. So you have the expensive towers, then you have the data in different places, the middle data manipulating company that works with Verizon. Now, if I wanted for I don't know, let's say if I had a pen that has an RFID in it that says where I am, what my temperature is, how many times I wrote, and so on. I have to go through this, if I'm a pen manufacturer, through all of this. Helium's done the following thing. They said, no, what we'll do is the following. They went into creating what's called the public network. Public network, anybody can buy a little device, put them on their window, and it extends their Wi-Fi from home.
Right.
Once you do that, they connect to each other, and it connects to a blockchain. And now they're going and allowing people, companies that have RFID devices that want data, to put those RFIDs to link them back to that network. Now, all of a sudden, it's single data, not multiple data, so you don't need to normalize it. You don't need a middleman to make sense of it. And instead of having this huge cost of physical towers, it's just extending what I had home. So they go into markets that cost, let's say, $2 a X bit per data, and they bid it for 20 cents. That's what's happening. So it's the creativity keeps on coming in. We'll see a lot more of it.
Interesting. We have a few more questions from the audience that I'd like to share. And this deals with the financial sector that we were talking about before. Can you provide an example of that part of the financial sector that could be rendered obsolete, and how might that occur?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Business to business wiring. When you're buying and selling in the supply chain. Today, when I want to buy something, I have to, as a business, I have to go to my bank. From my bank account, I have to make a request. That request is then made. That money sits there, right? And then they send it. It's received. And so there's at least 4 different areas, and it goes at the end. If I was selling and buying from you and me, Carlos, we're going through all this. We're waiting for it. We're probably paying fees. Our money's being locked for, even if it's 24 hours or 7 hours. When you multiply that by a billion people, it's a lot of interest could be made. But here on Wire, if we're 2 businesses and we're on a blockchain and somebody has a DeFi product, I can just straight from my Bitcoins or Ethereum or so on, pay you as business to business. So I think one of the areas that we could see is that for the sending and payments for different parts of what we need in the supply chain, the blockchain can really accelerate that and change the cost structure.
Interesting. Thank you. What about public versus private blockchain? Is there a
Absolutely.
any benefits that are derived from?
Absolutely. Let's one thing, when you hear public versus private, public is a little bit different here. We're not talking about the government-owned municipal offering. We're talking public, that it's transparent and available to everybody, right? That's the thing. So there's a few things, and on this one, you may want to jot down because it's specific words that you can get back to. The first thing. A public blockchain would be the example of Helium. It's created something that anybody can come and use now and see. So with a situation like this versus the pharmaceutical one that I presented early on, how I got into it, that would be a private blockchain. So the first one, the public is permissionless, whereas the private one is permissioned. That's the beginning. So you got to think of the governance of how to use. The second part is that on the public, anybody can join and transact on it. On the private, like the one thing, you have restricted access. Only those people who are allowed to participate in buying and selling a product because they're named as brokers or this or the other can do it. The third one is rights. On a public one, there's no rights management. I can't, it is what it is, this blockchain. Carlos doesn't have more rights to do something than I do. It's equal. But if we were in a private blockchain, when you think of the governments that permission, the rights, you may say, hey, only X number of people at that level are allowed to validate something or to add something or to decide who mines a block, so you control it. The other thing also is access management. In the case of a public one, again, you don't need to have an infrastructure to decide who can come in. In a private one, you really want to. So access management becomes very important. Who comes in, how they come in, how you protect it, and so on. from a scalability issue, today public-oriented blockchains are not yet generally scalable for many things. So they have scalability issues. They're getting better, as we're seeing. But
forgive me for interrupting. And is this because of the computing power that is necessary?
The computing power and the proof of stake, proof of work and stake, and the way it's done with because everybody participates. When you do a private blockchain, you may already name where is your computational power that will do that validation. So you can control it, or you can outsource it to one group, or only 3 groups, or 4 groups. So there's more control over it. So you can decide how much computational power you want to use and for what. So you limit it.
So getting back to the notion about how this is creating, I guess it'd be creative destruction, right? We're disintermediating a lot of things, a lot of companies and sectors. Is there a possibility of blockchain, in addition to destruction of certain types of business, is it allowing for the creation of new cottage industries, perhaps?
The answer is yes.
One issue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The simple answer is yes.
Right.
It's interesting. If you think of the internet, there were some companies that were just local businesses that sold just in one tiny region, right? But they had a really good product. Nobody knew about it. And because of the internet, they had this exposure all of a sudden, and somebody from anywhere could start buying. So what you would do, you'd have cottage industries that were just regional became global. And also the other thing is in less developed nations and so on, that sometimes can't participate in the same way. The internet sort of democratized and gave people even with less the ability to. The same thing happens with blockchains, that those who get it can get into the game without having to be the ones that have all the resources. So for instance, if you start a business with a blockchain, an ICO, you have people sitting in Bangladesh that don't have access to the private equity and venture capital engines that we have here, but they have access to ICO-based money raising through the blockchain. So it does give that opportunity.
Thank you for that. So we're coming up almost on the hour. To round out our discussion, perhaps we can go back to my original comments at the start, where I mentioned that I always thought that crypto and blockchain were the same thing. Can you shed some light on that, and why? Why has it been misleading, or we're using the words incorrectly? Maybe.
It's not even correctly or incorrectly. I like yourself, I've been struggling to get it. I think I know a little bit more, so I can share what I've learned a little bit more. I've got ways to go to really get it, especially when it comes to value. But generally, think of there's the way that the concept of blockchain was brought about was to also create a token on it. In other words, the stakeholders that use the blockchain, let's say the blockchain could be for buying, selling cars, or it could be for like helium or something else. You will have the stakeholders would be people who want to buy and sell. It would be the miners who want to mine, right? This would be, and sometimes it might be the community that wants to do something in it. So let's say if those were the stakeholders. The original concept of the token is that because blockchain has something social and is community-based in the way it was created in its concept, you need to believe. You need to believe in it. So they created these tokens, and then for me, because I believed, I said I'm going to spend money and computational power in solving something and helping a transaction. I get paid in a token for doing that. Now that token in itself has no value. It has no link to a fiat currency. So the beginning of these blockchains is that unless you had belief, there was no inherent value to this token. But if enough of the stakeholders that benefit from that blockchain continually contribute, and then they say, oh, every time I do something, I can get a token. So the blockchain creators in a business typically create incentives for people to behave certain ways, do certain things, and then for that they get a token. So that's the token. Now, what happened? A token, when this tokenization of a blockchain becomes really successful, you could say that it becomes a form of digital currency, because if you and I see value, we're ready to exchange it, just like we would with the thing. You say, hey, Ara, I'll just sell you my car with the tokens you have. You don't have to send me a check or a wire.
So the token itself becomes like currency, like the dollar bill that we hold in our hand, which is a promise.
Within the reality of that blockchain, correct.
Yeah.
So it becomes a currency for that blockchain. What's been happening is that with Bitcoin and Ethereum especially, Bitcoin was the first one. So even though it's the technology was somewhat archaic, non-scalable, but so it started, people believed in it and they start saying, yeah, I'll exchange that, to me has value. Right. Ethereum did the same thing. And so those, you could see, those are, especially Ethereum would be example of a cryptocurrency. You could go buy Ethereum. That's really backed by a real business, by a real network that does something. So, but then there's all kinds of, you could just create through a meme, not the blockchain, but a crypto. So for instance, when Dogecoin came out, there was no concept of a blockchain business behind it. Right. I said, just we'll create that, throw it, we'll do a meme and people will think there's value. But then it started creating itself some inherent value in it. Yeah. So, and then there's a third thing that I'd like to mention, also called stablecoin. We need to understand what a stablecoin is, because that it's the intersection between your token, your cryptocurrency, and your fiat currency. The stablecoin was created basically since cryptocurrencies are so volatile, they go up and down, you can't really do business with them. Because if I'm buying this mouse today for $10 and things go up, I may have paid you $10,000, right? And as a result, that won't work. So the idea was that if you put, for each coin that you hold, you put the equivalent dollar or yen or an approved currency, that crypto becomes a stable coin. And as a result, now you can transact. So you could say that there's a stable coin associated with Ethereum or with Doge or something that I could use, especially in DeFi. Okay. The problem with that, and I'll stop there, I think it's important to know, just like the mortgage fiasco, what's happening today, because there's not smart regulation, companies create the stable coin and never put 1 to 1. They'll only put like 1 to 10, and then they borrow and lend against it, and they create a deck of card. So the question, could this deck of card take the whole thing down with it? Is the question.
So that we have one question that I believe, because you're touching on government's role in all of this, right? Shawana asks, if it is from business to business, how would the government benefit? Or will it benefit, or maybe it won't? Is blockchain meant, because there's a sense or a vibe in the chat strings or what I'm reading about how they are intentionally creating like a private network that the government can't peer into.
I think there's two parts. Yeah, look, in its essence, what's a government? A government is a more powerful and bigger company, right? At the end of the day, in scale of things. So companies don't want somebody to come and take their market away. Governments don't want to. So blockchain does threaten that power. There's no question about it. So if it's left totally unregulated and used also with all kinds of cryptos on it without regulation, it can it could maybe become wonderful or it could become horrible. We don't know, but certainly it'd be wild for a long time. So one of the things here is smart regulation. You see the bill that just went that was signed in Congress for infrastructure. When you look at, I studied the part on the regulations that go on cryptocurrencies.
Mhm.
That's really where they're looking, because blockchain at the end, they can't control it because it's just a technology. But once you put the cryptocurrency, and that's where it needs to evolve. So for instance, right now, one of the things that's being pushed through with that legislation is to make anybody who is using and transacting blockchain a broker of a security. So they want to say, a crypto becomes a security, not a currency. That has huge implications, because if you're a miner and you're invested in mining and solving these program and creating a block and helping the transaction,
right.
and if they think you're a broker, now you have it's a totally different thing, but you're not really a broker. So I think what's happening, our government is still not smart enough to know what type of regulation they should use to both help it and also to some degree make sure that it doesn't become subversive.
Okay.
Because since the US has the most, call it, economic control over blockchain today, it would be a shame not to keep it. We became so much bigger because of the internet, but it begs smart regulation.
Okay. So what I'd like to do now, if it's okay with you, is to maybe talk about, maybe a summary of bringing it all together. And,
absolutely.
And then maybe we can proceed to, a Q&A session with people asking more questions in the chat. Sure.
So maybe we can have slide 3.
Sure.
Whoever is in charge of can control. So really, I think just to sum it up, if you look all the things we talked about, and I know for some of us we know more about it, so it's easier to participate. For some of us, we say, oh, I got to catch up a little bit, but we looked at what is a blockchain. So both from a technology perspective, what it does, and how it deals with tokens, and what's the relationship between a token, blockchain, and hence the crypto. We looked and we said a blockchain is in infancy, just like the beginning of the internet. That was low bandwidth and slow. So that's their scalability issues. So we need to see how there'll be opportunity to increase scalability for entrepreneurs as well, and then use it. The other thing is how to use it transformationally versus efficiency wise. So I think businesses that already exist can use blockchain to bring more efficiency in their operations, protect themselves. Entrepreneurs can use it transformationally, and governments could use it transformationally for just changing the whole way we're looking at something. Think of all the universities, if all our degrees and so on were in one place on blockchain, right? So that would be a transformational. Last mile problem is something that we have to be very aware of. When you're talking NFT, you're immediately in the digital world, so you don't have to worry about. But when the blockchain goes beyond just being a financial transaction engine, and it starts trying to track and make sense of physical goods, that link is sacred. You get it wrong at the beginning, it is insecure. We talked about public and private, so that goes into efficiency and transformational and the level of democratization. So an area you may want to look at it. Now, hopefully you get a better sense of what's a crypto token, what's the difference between why Ethereum is different from Doge, because one has a whole business model behind it and the other one has just hype behind it, right? So that's the other one. And finally, business applications. We talked about helium. I'd welcome each of you to start thinking, what business do you know that you think that if you did it on blockchain, you could really change it, make things, change the economics of it and the speed of it. And I think with that, hopefully it gives you a sense. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing what I've learned as a non-expert.
Okay. Thank you for that. We're going to now turn to the Q&A session, and we have quite a number of questions popping in on the chat. Lisa asks, what is the proof of delivery for a blockchain transaction?
Proof of delivery of the physical good, or proof of delivery of the transaction having been delivered?
Transaction.
I probably cannot go into all the details technically because I don't know it. But generally speaking, the proof is in the creation of this new block, which links itself to the previous one. And I think that's the key thing. We talk the first block coming in, that's the weakest link, right? That's from the physical world to the digital. Once instead it's created, so all you're doing, you keep on moving it and it keeps on existing. So the creation of the block is the proof of delivery in itself.
Okay. Thank you for that. This is more of a comment than a question that somebody wrote in the chat. Blockchain is like Windows operating system, while cryptocurrency is the apps built on it. Is that a good analogy?
I think it's not a bad analogy. I hadn't thought about it. It may be missing on one element that typically we don't trade apps, right? So you could have Windows or you could have the App Store. I think people buy and sell, but we don't use it as a currency. So as a concept, one sitting on the other, I think that would be a good analogy. I don't think it addresses the currency or digital currency alternative that's coming out of blockchain, which obviously is not in the same way.
Lisa asks, does blockchain have the same impact on the environment as cryptocurrency due to energy consumption?
The question, the two are not interchangeable. They work together. Cryptocurrency, all it is a token that gets generated. The way a token is generated is when it's mined. So let's say we have a transaction. That transaction needs to be validated. So now all of these computers come to solve the crypto puzzle that brings the money from here to there, debits mine, gives it to you, right? So those things that happen, you can't separate blockchain from the token. Blockchain creates token when it resolves a transaction.
Okay. Another question coming in from Martha. Can you explain minting with respect to information into blockchain?
Okay, I'm not an expert in that area. At the very high level, my understanding is the following: that when a transaction needs to be validated or attributes of a transaction need to be validated on the blockchain, that mining occurs. The mining solves the problem and creates the new blocks and links the two bits of information. So now that we know that transaction happened,
right?
When that mining has happened, a token is generating, and that's what's called minting. So it's like minting of a currency. So that's where we use minting in blockchain.
Okay. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions in the chat? I think I've read all that, and I have my assistant, Trevi, I believe. I believe I've read all the questions in the chat area. If you can confirm. Okay, thank you. She confirmed. I want to thank you, Ara, for the talk that you've given. You provided some wonderful information, and this has been a really good look at the basics of blockchain, and I'm sure we're all learning about this. This is I mean, we still talk about the internet as being in its infancy stage, right? Imagine blockchain itself. It's just super infancy, and we're all still learning. And we'd love to perhaps have you back for another chat in a more in-depth capacity in the future, if that would be okay with you.
If I can go in more depth, I don't know yet. So assuming that I'm
no, in the future, we're talking about in the future, because this is like a fascinating topic that we're all just beginning to get a hold of. So I want to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And I want to leave one thought to especially the younger people who are studying business and are thinking of starting a business. You're sitting if instead of being 57, if I was 27 today,
Yeah.
I would put every single bit of my brain and body and thing in figuring this out now and getting involved this is a little bit like when, in my opinion, when they discovered the black gold in the early days, pioneers came. Some of us here are too old to probably be able to come and really dedicate enough years of our life to it. But those who start now, you're sitting on something incredible.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ara. Thank you so much for donating your time and for those of you in the audience, Ara is an old friend of SPS. He is more than graciously attended several of these talks that we've had, and we look forward to a continuing relationship with Ara in the future. At this juncture, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Knox, our academic director, who has some closing thoughts.
First, I certainly want to thank my dear friend Ara for all of what he has been giving in support of what we're trying to do. And certainly in my work across universities, but there's something very special about CUNY to he and I, because I've worked at CUNY for a very long time and he studied here at CUNY. We both understand that when you go into the business world, there are expectations in the business world want to receive you that way. They don't want you to come and then have to fill those expectations. They want you coming in sort of already in those discussions. You talked about Schumpeter's creative destruction. And when we look at this whole Bitcoin and we look at blockchain, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this next phase, and it's really a very important invention that you should know. And today's conversation was really just to get the conversation going. So these Let's Talk series are just that, they're talks. But it hopefully what it does is it inspires you to go and learn much, much more about it. And so I want to thank you for coming in and understanding the importance of it. And I hope that Ara's conversation will leave you with some things that you should contemplate as you move through your career. But the other bigger thing is understand that the business world evolves just like the world evolves. And there's going to be these other major issues. I just was sitting and I was looking at this whole tourism, aerospace travel. And what does that mean? That's major. I mean, you see it as a flat discussion, but if you allow your mind to be as critical in its thinking as organizations need you to be, you're going to start to think, what does this mean for the next iteration of something? So these topics are important. It is important that you continue to think outside of the box. It's important that you stay informed about conversations going on. If you hear it one time, you hear it 2 times, stop. 3 times, you need to start joining that conversation. It really is that critical. So I want to encourage you all to continue to be a part of this. We are doing this work not just for ourselves, we're doing it for our students, we're doing it for our society as a whole. So please join us if you have discussions that you hear a little bit too much about and you think it's something we should consider. By all means, I want you to bring that to our attention. I want to actually thank also Carlos Ronisky, who graciously took on this charge of making sure we're able to have these on a regular basis. He certainly has reached out to his network. We're going to be having the business conference. I hope that you'll look at that as well as a way of getting involved. Basically, what we're doing is we're tying academics to practitioners, future practitioners, and trying to make business education and the practical world sort of connect in such a way that it has a much more potent impact. So for all the students that are here, and certainly for the faculty members that are here and administrators, and also those who are guests outside of CUNY, I want to say thank you for participating, and we wish you well, and we hope that we're going to see you in the conference. We hope to hear future ideas. Carlos, that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to you, and I wish everyone a good day.
Thank you, Ed. And once again, I want to thank everybody who's participated today. Dr. Knox, of course, and Ara Ohanian, a longtime friend of SPS. One last piece of information that I'd like to talk about, and is of this being our Talking Business series. Today's was the second installment, and we look forward to doing more in the future. And we'd like the audience's participation in what topics they'd like to see covered. So to that end, we'd like you to email us. And Trevi, if you can drop the email address into the chat for people to see. And so we want to get feedback from our students, from our faculty and general audience as to what topics they'd like to see covered in the future for this Talking Business series. And then so the email address for that is business@sps.cuny.edu. I'll repeat that again, business@sps.cuny.edu, and it's in the chat area. You'll see this, I assume that there's a recording that will be posted on YouTube for this event. So if you didn't catch it then, you can watch it on YouTube and scroll to the very end, and you'll see me talking the email address, verbalizing it. Once again, thank you, Ara, thank you, Dr. Knox, and thank you to our audience. Have a wonderful afternoon.